Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And it's our final of the Melville season. Melville is finished on movie now, or it's going to be finishing very soon. We've missed all the other ones that they had, Bob Le Flambeur and something else. This is Le Cercle rouge, or the Red Circle.
Yes.
And it's another crime one, more traditional crime rather than the...
Yeah, it's a heist film.
Heist film, and it's got a real classic heist sequence in it, a good kind of half-hour long, Rififi-esque, silent, three guys at the top of their game doing what they do, heist sequence. I had quite a good time with this, although I thought it was a bit long.
Oh, I didn't think a moment was wasted.
I thought it had long gurzes, but I did quite enjoy it, and it opens with another epigraph. This is the third of the Melville that we've seen that opens with an epigraph. This one is a made-up quote, supposedly from the Buddha, but Melville actually just made it up, about how the Buddha supposedly said, men, when they're destined to meet, will meet, and they'll meet in the red circle, and that's all you get. And I think in some ways it actually goes to what I've been saying about Melville, in that his characters have a mechanical quality to them in the way they go about their jobs, but don't necessarily seem to get joy or pleasure or meaning out of them. They just do them because they do them. And in the same way, the epigraph talks about destiny, and if you're destined to meet, you will meet. And that's just the way it is.
I don't know. I mean, I'm still not sure I agree with you on that, right? Because I think in a way, being a professional about their job is almost the only thing that drives them, right? Because, I mean, you don't get the sense that pulling off this great heist is going to be the culmination of Alain Delon's life, right? He's just doing it because it's there to do, right? And he is a crook, you know. So you get aspects of their psychology, like Yves Montand being an alcoholic, having something to prove, you know, being completely a whiz at what he does. But again, why he does it is really not clear. Yeah, so I think the thing is that his characters are not like three-dimensional characters the way that we're used to seeing. Yeah, there's an aspect in which kind of they're working as tropes, yeah, as kind of ideas, really, you know. So I think I do know what you mean, but I would kind of put it slightly differently, really. I mean, what I want to know from you is, now having seen The Red Circle, do you find that your appreciation of the films has increased by just cumulatively watching more, that you begin to sense his style and appreciate it
I think
more?
I do. I mean, that would be a fair thing to say. I think it's been a really interesting exercise, and so you can see in this continuations of themes that you've seen in the other films, or continuations of styles, and continuations in, as I say, I think the defining thing for me is somehow about how these characters relate to each other. And it's about kind of how the little moments in their relationships or in their behaviours show you everything about them. And actually putting these films, making them in quite tight genres, heists, robberies, cops and robbers, means that you kind of take a lot of that as read. And so when something slightly different happens, you really notice it. Yeah. You know, so for instance, in this, Yves Montand, he's a really interesting character because, as you say, he's an alcoholic. He has well, what to me appears to be a hallucination, although it could be real that the
no, it's a hallucination.
Definitely seems to be a hallucination, and he has kind of real trouble. And then he kind of turns down his share of the loot, doesn't he? Yeah. And you kind of think, what's led him to do this? You know, so whereas the other two characters have more of that, as I was saying, kind of dispassionate attitude to them, he's someone who is troubled, and that leads him to behave in a different way to the others. You know, so he's a very interesting character in this.
Before we continue, why don't you summarize the story?
Good idea. Alain Delon is Corey, who is coming out of prison after 15 years, I think.
I thought it was 5.
He's coming out of prison after a certain stretch, and he's been released early for good behaviour. And on his way out of prison, he's given a tip about a jewellery store in Paris. And it's supposed to be very hard to break into, but, you know, there's lots and lots of loot there. Separately, Gian Maria Volonté is a prisoner being transported on a train, and he escapes. And there's a huge manhunt set up. Alain Delon kind of notices this, deliberately leaves the boot of his car unlocked, and Gian Maria Volonté comes upon it, hides in there. So those two meet. So they kind of see opportunity and they decide, we're going to go to Paris, we're going to pull off this heist on this jewellery store. They get Yves Montand involved. He's, as you say, this alcoholic, and he's a kind of sharpshooter. And they need him for a very specific part of the heist.
But importantly, the Yves Montand character is an ex-policeman, and actually top of the class, and a classmate of the inspector who is investigating this case.
Yeah, and the inspector is played by André Bourvil.
He's also a star of French cinema, so he's a big name of French cinema. Not quite a star like Alain Delon or Yves Montand, but a real figure in French cinema.
And I suppose the one other character that's really worth mentioning would be the bar owner.
Yes.
Who kind of knows all the people underground, but he has a very strict code about not snitching to anyone. I wouldn't tell you even if I knew. And of course he does always know, but he's never going to tell.
And having seen Army of Shadows so close to this, you realize that Simone Signoret, Mathilde in the film, and her weakness with her daughter has a parallelism here in his weakness with his son. Yeah.
Yeah. The son is used by the police as bait to get the dad to squeal.
Yes.
That's how criminals put it.
You're down with the lingo.
So yeah, like that's his weakness, because this is a guy who really, all that you see about this guy, because he's a kind of a thinly drawn and he's a minor character, is I don't tell anyone anything. And of course it's like, it's Chekhov's gun. If you've got a guy who says he never tells anyone anything, by the end of the film he's going to tell someone something. And that's how they get him to do it.
I think this time, so unlike at the cinema, when we go to the cinema together and you take notes and I don't, watching it on movie, I was able to take notes, and I want to just read you my list, okay. And then kind of see what you think. So I'm looking at the film itself, but I'm also looking at it, now as having seen like several Melville films in a row. So one of the things that strikes me is the sound, the sparsity of sound. Yeah, so if you compare it to kind of modern films where there's so many sound effects of all kinds, kind of, this is really, really sparse. Yeah, you hear ambient sound, you often hear only one sound at a time, etc. Which goes along with a kind of a sparsity of image still. We talked about this last time, but I really think, even on location shoots around the Place Vendôme, you only see like one figure moving, and it's really impressive when you see more than that. So when there are the searches, it's almost like in contradiction to what is the norm in the film, which is like sparsely populated frame. And
when all the police come out of the trees at the end as well, it's like there's life all of a sudden. Yeah, so
there's a coolness of attitude. Yeah, it is kind of a world that's informed by the world of cinema, by film noir, by attitudes kind of shaped by cinema. I also noticed the nightclub, which recurs in so many of his films. We think about Flick. You haven't seen Le Samurai, but it's set in the same nightclub. And one other thing about Melville is he owns his own studio, a very tiny studio. So you can see how he's reusing kind of elements of it. Stylistically, also the zooms. I mean, it's that era, but the way he uses zooms is completely characteristic. There's kind of a symmetry in the image. His framing is very symmetrical. It's often on an angle. But it's always it's almost like he frames a very orderly world. There's no handheld camera, no jumping around. It's always like very symmetrical. The attitude to women. So the very first thing is Alain Delon comes out of prison and he knows that his former girlfriend, is with that big boss now. I don't know how he does it, but he sniffs it. He knows, right? And when he gets home, it's like he takes her picture, which has been on his bedside, and just dumps it in the bin. and that's the last you see of women in this film. Yeah, it's a really male world. Um, it's another film in which everybody dies at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no. In fact, it got me thinking at one point because I thought everyone dies, and they die very unceremoniously. And I thought, at some point, like all these films, they end up always dying, but they have long careers before that. Why can't we see in the middle when they stay alive after a mission? Like that's what I want to see one of them. But you're right, yeah. Again,
they all die. And actually, the other thing that I noticed is that there is often a scene in at least Army of Shadows, Ludulos, and this, where there's a scene in a stately home, and in Lidulos and this, the shootout finale happens in the stately home. So the films have this, Paris countryside kind of, dichotomy. They sometimes take little side trips to Marseille or whatever, but it really is someplace in the country and then Paris, yeah? That kind of bookend the film. And then, the finale often takes place in a stately home where all that the stately home represents, which is wealth, security, blah, disintegrates. Yeah, the heist doesn't come off. The guy who built the house gets killed. Yeah, it's very. There's a lot of continuities amongst the films.
Yeah, well, I think what it's about is about getting you as close as you can to success and safety, and then taking it away from you. And that happen, and that's represented more so in a stately home.
Yes.
I mean, certainly it was in Le Delos, where it was about. It looked like it had all worked in Le Delos, and it was about I'm going to be able to move here. Whereas here, because the cop is playing the guy they're going to sell the diamonds to, already it's not going to work. So it was more, I think, more effective in Le Delos. But you're right.
I really like the way that Melville trusts the audience to see. Yeah, so, so for example, a lot of the action scenes are very slow, but actually I found it very exciting because, so for example, the scene at the beginning where the Gian Maria Volonté character is being, transported to jail, you see all of the mechanisms through which he manages his escape, yeah? You see his handcuffs, he takes the handcuff off. You see this rope, yeah, that kind of, you think he might strangle the guy below with, right? And certainly you see it go through his mind, but then, kind of basically he goes out the window, he kicks the window out, yeah? So kind of, and like with the heist, you see every step in the process, yeah, and he lets you see it and kind of and makes it exciting for you to see, with kind of little moments of tension, and this is kind of accompanied visually. So, for example, I love that when Gian Maria Volonté escapes, that you're in a wintry wood, yeah, that the wood is bare, there's no leaves, yeah, and actually he's wearing a white shirt, and the whiteness of the shirt really stands out against the grayness and bleakness of the background. Kind of, I mean, I think it's visually stunning, the film.
Yeah, and then he strips down to his tighty whities at one point, and he really stands out.
Which made me think, how the hell did he manage to keep them so white after, like...
I suppose there is that.
Anyway, those are my kind of thoughts, that kind of I wrote down. I mean, what were yours?
This is something you're probably not going to agree with and not going to like very much. I really think Alain Delon is not very good in this at all. I don't buy him. Right. I really bought him in Unflick, and I think he really fits in that, and he has that kind of weary thing about him. In this, I think his moustache is awful. And he really, it just doesn't suit him, and I don't think it looks the part. And I think he is a complete blank. He's really wooden. I don't see what you're supposed to get out of his characters, out of his performance.
I think he's meant to be wooden. I mean, I think he's meant to be blank. Sorry, I mean, he's not like this in other films, but he is very much like this in The Samurai. And actually, Flick is also very impassive, and I think he's meant to be like this as well. Though you're right. Kind of the moustache is not a plus. but it might have been a plus with a male audience, because the thing about Delon is he's ridiculously good looking. I think there is an attempt, because he had a big, he was a big action star of the time, right? So, I mean, women, he was, a huge star. So he was liked by both men and women. But I think sometimes these attempts at kind of making him less attractive is something that's really directed at a male audience, particularly in this film, which really, to me, is something that is largely directed at a male audience. It's all men. It's a very masculine world. It's an action film in many ways, right? So I think kind of, when you see him at the beginning with a mustache and, and the way that he's dressed and his shirt hanging out of, his trousers. I mean, I think there's a deliberate attempt to kind of make him less good looking. Yeah, make him more human. Yeah, more something that people can identify with and not be bothered with, because, I think largely male, particularly heterosexual male audiences, are really bothered by male stars who are too good looking. Yeah.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I suppose like the moustache and the kind of sort of dirtying him up, if you like, makes me think of Robert Pattinson in the Safdie Brothers film. Good Time, whereas I think it really worked in Good Time, and I think it's a much more interesting character in Good Time. It's not a perfect comparison, but I can see what you mean. But I do think that there's just his character in this is really empty and blank, and it's not even a cipher of a character. It just holds no interest for me, what he does or what his internal monologue might be. I don't quite. Yeah. Whereas in Unflick, I'm thinking about what's this guy thinking. Even if he may not be doing all that much on the surface, it's like a Ryan Gosling type of performance almost. It's like the blank slate that makes you think about what's going on underneath. I don't get that out of this. But I also know what you say about them being two-dimensional characters, and they are generic. But
I think that's the movie. Like,
I wanted more.
Kind of, it might be worth thinking, well, why does Melville do this, right? Because he's using three of the biggest stars of the period, right? Gian Maria Volonté, Montand, and Delon. And both Gian Maria Volonté and Delon are given almost no background. I mean, you don't know what drives them, you don't know what their past is. I mean, you know what their recent past is, but, for example, I don't even know why Gian Maria Volonté is on the train. What did he do to kind of, so you're not told those things. So I think the kind of, this is a film that's kind of communicating with archetypes, rather than people, So kind of...
I understand that. But what I feel is that I didn't get any communication even through that archetype from Delon in this. Whereas with Volonté, he's quite a cliche in some respects because, as you say, you don't know much about him, but he has a violent streak, a kind of ruthless streak. And he's kind of grimy almost in some respect. I feel like I get more out of that. I feel like I understand the man a little bit more. Although there is that interesting moment between the two of them where Delon's picked him up and he's in the boot of the car, and the guys who he's previously fought off come back after him. They chase him off the road. And so there's two guys with guns pointing them at Delon saying, "Get out of the car." And he does. And then Volonté gets out the boot of the car, and he's got a gun, and he gets the drop on these two guys. So it's this unspoken thing of Delon putting himself in a very vulnerable position because he trusts that Volonté is going to have his back.
Yes,
that's kind of interesting, and that's not even done through looks or anything, because you can't look at the guy in the boot. It's just he knows that he's going to be there. So these two characters have an understanding at this point already.
Yes. I mean, I think that whole thing in the film is so fascinating because, what brings Delon, Volonté, and Montand together? Yeah, I mean, one is an ex-cop or a retired cop. It's not, with an alcohol problem. Yeah, so they're all kind of, part of a criminal world. Yeah, but on the other hand, Montand, who was in the academy with Bourvil and who worked with Bourvil, they obviously completely dislike each other. And yet Montand forms like this affinity with Volonté and Delon that's kind of, very strong but unspoken. Yeah, there's like a trust there between all three of them. So I think kind of, this raises questions of why, kind of, you know, and the film sides with them, right? Like, yeah, the film is about these criminals, really. Yeah. So kind of, it's not making you, it's not criticizing the law, but the law is subsidiary. It's the law is the problem with the film. Yeah, kind of, you know, the film is siding with these criminals, which I think is very interesting.
Although I think it complicates the law slightly, because I think you are given a mechanism to have sympathy with the cop character who's after them as well, in that meeting he has with the politician, I think it is, early on, or he's like a commissioner. I'm not sure exactly what he was, but you see him meeting with this guy who's some official above him, who's saying everyone's guilty, all men are guilty, they're born innocent, but that doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
You know. Meanwhile, and so he's basically saying, I want more arrests. You know, stop letting people off, stop needing evidence. He's saying, and the cop is saying, well, no, innocent till proven guilty. Like, I can't just arrest whoever I want. There's a process here, and so he has a code as well. I mean, his is really the right code and a very official code, and actually,
but he's not he's not above using a child's attempt at suicide against the father.
No, that's true.
You know, so
that's true.
And actually, I think, again, in terms of, you know, because I think one of the recurring things about Melville's films is that as soon as you start having feelings for someone, you have a problem, right? So, you know, on the one hand, Delon trashes his ex-girlfriend's picture, but the only other human affinity or, you know, love or, is really between the father and the son. And again, that's kind of the downfall of the protagonists of these films. Yeah, it's what kind of weakens you, makes you vulnerable, kind of, you know?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's a kind of such an interesting thing, really, for me. It's a very, what's the word?
Bleak.
Yeah, it's very anti-humanist somehow. Yeah, like kind of, you know. So, you know, these men are all operating in a vacuum of professionalism, of doing their job or fulfilling their function, right? But it's one that largely that they're alone, really. Yeah, I mean, even when they get together, the bonds are the bonds of professionalism, not, you know, feeling, right? Yeah. So, and you know, every bond of feeling is either a weakness or a betrayal.
Yeah.
So I find that very, you know, kind of very interesting.
Talk to me about the heist sequence, because it's a big deal in the film and it's a good half hour long.
Yes.
You know, what do you like it? Do you think it works? Do you think there are problems with it?
Actually, I'm such a queen because I just thought the jewels were not good enough. They should have used better ones, right? Like, you know, kind of, and this is like how, you know, Melville is so heterosexual, because, you know, some other director who had different ambitions for his film, you know, would have shown you more of the jewels, and would have shown you, you know, you would have rented them from Boucheron. You know, you would have had like huge big diamonds like in Topkapi, right, which is another heist film. And actually, showing the beauty of the jewels is itself an attraction, right?
I remember you had the same problem with Ocean's 8, which is the one where the girls teamed up at the Met Gala, I think it is. Yes. And you were saying, like, this is supposed to be the Met Gala. The beautiful dresses, the jewels, the diamonds, show them off, make them beautiful. And the film doesn't do any of that.
Well, and it's a problem because, you know, those are attractions in a film, yeah? People go to the movies to see something like, to see those things, right? I mean, not only to see those films, but, you know, when you have a half-hour heist in the middle of a film, right, which is all about the jewels, you could have made the jewels more attractive. And actually, maybe it's significant.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because every time I've criticised Melville and said something isn't as good as I wanted it to be or good as I thought it should be, you've said, well, there's a reason it's not as good as that. And I think there might be a reason here, or at least an explanation, or at least justification, because to these men, you're saying, well, these films are for men, but also the jewels represent something to these particular men in the film that are stealing them. The jewels don't represent beauty. They represent money. and that's all
Yes.
they see in them.
True.
You know.
No, it's true.
So to show them off in that way for the audience would not be the way that the characters are seeing them,
Yeah,
and it would actually kind of be at odds.
And it might have removed the audience's thinking from the real goal at hand. So, for example, and there was another moment of this, though, I don't know if you noticed, but Montand, in his ramshackle rooms, where he's having nightmares about snakes and rats and, reptiles jumping on his bed. Yeah, and it's obviously meant to be a really run-down place, yeah? He's drinking himself into oblivion. And he's meant to be an ex-cop, right? But did you notice all the open luggage? He has these huge...
I didn't particularly pick up on it. Go on.
Well, he has these huge Vuitton arcs, the kind of the big luggage that people used to use to go on ships. Yeah,
Right.
that kind of, you would open them and they were like almost standing wardrobes with drawers and everything. Right?
Yeah.
And my first feeling was, how does an cop, rundown alcoholic in a ramshackle apartment afford Vuitton?
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about the place you could afford if he didn't buy that stuff.
Well, no, my feeling is probably also Vuitton didn't signify in 1970 what it does now. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, that was what you're saying. Like that might have just been pretty normal luggage to have, actually.
Well, I mean, it was expensive even then, but it doesn't signify the way that it does now.
Right.
Yeah, like you wouldn't have expected an audience to know that it was Vuitton in 1970, right? Now it's a big international brand. You see the trademark imprint, yeah, and you know that it is. So, but anyway, so I'm just saying that you're right, because when I saw that luggage, it took me out of the film and asked why is a cop having that luggage, right? Whereas, So if you would have maybe brought too much attention to the individual jewels, it might have had the same effect, though I would have been very happy to see them.
Yeah. Well, you go to the Met Gala and, leave Melville to his... to his life. I was thinking, because I knew, really all I knew about the film was that it had this central high sequence and that it was kind of iconic and what have you. And so it made me think about Rififi when it was happening, because it's silent almost entirely, or wordless rather, I should say. Obviously, there's sound effects.
Yes.
And it sort of has this professionalism. These guys know what they're doing and they're just getting on with their job and so on. I found it less spectacular than Rififi, which I think, or maybe spectacular is not the right word, but Rififi really had me on the edge of my seat in a way that this never did.
There were moments, I mean, I know what you mean, but there were moments where it did for me. The moment with the security guard when they're trying to climb in the window, the moment where Yves Montand shoots the key exactly, but the lasers don't go off, yeah? So it takes a while for the lasers to go off. The fact that they haven't taken into account that they are being recorded.
Yes.
Kind of. So that, there's a recording of them taking place, but they don't. Yeah. So all of those things did kind of create tension for me, though it's true it's not the edge of your seats kind of gasping thing that you might expect in a film like this.
Tension would be the word I'd use for what I was missing from it, really. So, I understood what everything was signifying. So when the cop, or the security guard rather, is kind of going back and forth between rooms, and you get a shot on him, and then you get a shot on the guys cutting through the glass, and it goes back and forth. I can see how that's trying to create tension, but I didn't feel any. Maybe that was just me though. You can take them how you find them.
I did, but I mean, I'm also wondering if the films are really in a way about that, So the things that stay in my mind the most are almost like images of isolation. Like there's a wonderful bit where Delon is going down the lift, right? And it is almost like a descent into hell or something, right? Like, you see the lift going down and then going down again, and his face keeps going into darkness, really. I like that. I love the pool room sequence where, you picture that it has no slots for the balls, but
Yeah, it's a billiard table.
right.
But, as far as I'm concerned, if a table has got balls on and no pockets, it's not worth it. That's my attitude.
I love that scene. I love the bit with Montand, and actually it's a very interesting thing, the differences between Montand and Delon, because Delon is playing really impassive. And I think Montand, who's a much warmer, actor, is trying to give you a character, the kind of, the alcoholic and, suffering from the shakes and, and there's something about his face and his stance and so on that kind of, is offering you more.
Yeah. And it is nice to have seen all these films in one go. I think it's a really interesting exercise.
Yes.
As opposed to going, oh yeah, I saw one of these once.
I think together you really get a sense of Melville, and I really love him. He speaks to me, that kind of worldview really speaks to me. And there's a kind of a fatalism about it, right? So, I was talking earlier about how the sound is used so sparingly, how kind of the image is quite controlled, right? And often drained of people, and life and so on. It focuses on 1, 2, 3 people. It's often very geometric. We talked about the nightclub sequences, and I was also thinking that I even associate a type of music with these films, which is, that 1960s cool jazz. Yeah, often one instrument. It's often a piano. Yeah, kind of. So it's a particular world, with particular sights and sounds and mood. I think it's all about mood, really,
Yeah. There's a huge amount of characters having understandings of each other without necessarily saying much.
Yes.
Which I think in some respects actually comes down to genre as well. Like, it's that the characters understand the genre that they're working in.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they understand this guy's a robber and this guy's a cop and blah, blah, blah. And they understand how each other will act or perceive their actions and so on and so forth.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
Yes. I mean, there are all kinds of shortcuts to that world, that's for sure. You don't need to explain a lot of things when you're working through a genre. But on the other hand, one of the fascinations for me is also, like, you do get to see Paris in 1970.
Yeah, actually, I thought that in this as well. It was interesting to look at the city, the way it was filmed, which I hadn't felt so much in the other films. Yeah, I felt it here.
Yes, you see a little bit in Flick, because there's all those scenes where kind of they go in the car, but these almost feel like stolen shots, right? So kind of Delon comes out of prison, and it's meant to be 7 o'clock in the morning or something, and you see him on the street. It's almost empty. The Place Vendôme. That must have been kind of cut off, because you see Montand run through the car with a completely empty Place Vendôme. I mean, these are all iconic kind of, Paris locations, really. Yeah, it's where the jewelry shops, the big expensive shops are.
Have you ever seen Set 8 and Rendezvous? It's a short film. It's by Claude Lelouch. It's from 1976, and it's a really iconic. I think you really like it. It's on YouTube and stuff. It's the camera was just put on the front of a car, and then he drove it through Paris at high speed at like 5 a.m. before anyone was around. And so it's like, again, it's what you say. It's a stolen shot, and basically just drives this car all the way through, and they put the sound of like a Ferrari on it, so it sounds really fast. And then he ends up at Montmartre, I think, and he kisses a girl, and that's the end. It's something that you really like because it has that sense of Paris of an era, and they are not allowed to be there as well.
Okay.
And that has a sense of this, as you say here. It's a beautiful place to look at, and it's the mood that you talk about. Everything sets up a mood in this.
Yes.
And when they go, when the heist basically kind of begins, and the guy turns the lights off, and every click of a light going off is accompanied by a bit of music. Yes, and then it's going to start.
Yes. He really lets you see. And he lingers over things. So I also love, for example, when Montand arrives and he's a little bit early. So he goes up the stairs and you see him go up the stairs and then you see him come down the stairs. And of course, in some ways, the shots are not telling you much. They're not conveying much information. Or let's put it another way. The mood they're creating exceeds the information, the narrative information that they're conveying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not that they're not doing nothing. It's just that they're doing something else. Yeah. Than merely telling you, telling you a plot point.
Do you think Melville comes across as a happy person through these films? What do you think he wants his audiences to feel?
I think they're very philosophical, and I think they're very fatalistic. Yeah, I mean, basically what they're saying is, you're always alone. Yeah, kind of love is a problem. There's a value in professionalism. Yeah, and doing your job. People can't be relied upon in terms of feeling. You're always going to be betrayed. I mean, that's what I get out of it. And on the other hand, there's a real romanticism about it. He clearly loves this, Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
He loves the impassivity of Delon's face. He loves the nightclub, that particular type of jazz music, the kind of fatalism, a kind of a romance of, an underworld, which kind of has its own bonds, and code of behavior that's adhered to, yeah.
Because I think when you think about the way that someone like Tarantino picks up on these films and talks about them and kind of appropriates elements of their style, it's about, God, they're so cool, these guys. The way they stand on street corners, the way they have their hats tipped, the way they have their hands in their pockets and the belt and all the raincoat and so on. It's about, wow, it's cool. And the way you kind of hear people talk about it would suggest a kind of a vitality to the world, which actually I think when you watch the films is not something that you feel, right? They're slower than that, and they're more pensive.
Yes, they are. They are about mood and thinking, and I think they are really existentialist films. It is like these films where everyone is alone in the world, everyone is detached. You can never really connect with anybody else. If you do so, it's momentarily. And on the other hand, you have the freedom to act. And with that freedom to act also comes a collective responsibility. We saw this very much in Army of Shadows, but actually you see this within this group of people as well. They're all acting in accordance with a code. And it's a code they trust more than they trust the person. So, if they see you as a person who behaves according to the code, then you're trusted. Independent of, kind of other qualities. So, they are very existential films. And kind of, I love them.
Of the four we've seen, how would you rank them? What's your favourite? What's your least favourite?
Well, my favorite is Army of Shadows, without a doubt, because there you see a political purpose, I mean, Le Doulos, Un Flic, and Le Cercle rouge are really like cop films or heist films. They're films about criminals, I do think that Army of Shadows, uses many of the same tropes but attributes them to the resistance. Kind of, there are continuities there, but you really get the sense of political purpose, of working to a cause, of working towards freedom and liberation, and and actually maybe that cause is also what gives these people a kind of a purpose, because in the gangster films these characters have no purpose and very little drive. I mean, kind of either fulfill their function, they rob if they're robbers, or and so on. But it's, you don't get the sense that like Delon is gasping for money, right? Like kind of, when he loses it, when it gets drenched in blood, he just leaves it, right? So, somebody else might have thought, oh, I'll wash it. So you don't get the sense that actually it's the money that drives them. Yeah, it's almost like it's the code that drives them.
Yeah, or it's just well, it's what I've been saying all along about the mechanical feeling to it. It's just that's what you are. You are a cop, and so you chase down robbers. You are a robber, so you rob stuff, and that's just what you do until you die.
But the films do convey a mood, a feeling, an attitude, yeah, that are also part of a philosophy. Yeah, so these films have depth, you know, and that are very, very distinctive. Yeah, I can't, you instantly recognize a Melville film. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think any film that has someone who's done up their raincoat really tightly, and has a gun in the pocket,
and is imitating Bogart in French,
or that's someone who's copied Melville.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this up. Kind of your final thoughts on the film.
I liked it. I thought it was interesting. I quite like the high sequence. There were things that are lacking. I really don't like Delon very much in it at all. I think he's a distraction, actually. That's how out of sync with the film I felt he was.
Too good looking for you, then.
He might have been, because he can't, like, his eyes. Wow, his eyes are so fucking beautiful. And then they tried to put that moustache on him to screw it up, and it just I couldn't take me up. He looks like someone who is so dedicated to being inconspicuous. Do you know what I mean? Like, he looks like he's wearing a disguise. Like, if you saw him on a street corner, you go, I see that guy. He's looking inconspicuous. And you can see how inconspicuous he is because I can't take my eyes off him.
Yeah. All right.
But it was good. Army of Shadows was brilliant, though, and that's the one, like, out of all of them. I in a sense, it's not the one to introduce people to Melville with, because it's not a genre piece, and it seems like that is kind of more where you would start with Melville, as we did.
Yes.
But Army of Shadows, of the four we've seen, is clearly, to me, superior to the other three.
Yeah.
And it's a real interesting, complex work of art.
I must say I love all of them. So as part of the movie season, they also showed
Léon Morin Priest and Bob Le Flambeur.
Bob Le Flambeur is marvelous. So I think my favorites really are Bob Le Flambeur, Le Samouraï, which we haven't seen, it wasn't shown as part of the season, and Army of Shadows. So anyway, a truly brilliant filmmaker, a unique voice whose influence is felt to this day, and I highly recommend that people see these films.
Le mot juste.
Okay. So thank you all very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube is where you can listen to us. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.